Okay, let's talk about record collecting for a few minutes. And let me say that the views expressed in this video are my views, and you may agree with them, you may not agree with them, that's your privilege, but I hope you learned something from it. I started collecting records probably 25 years ago, back in the late 80s when I was a kid. And back then I could go to just about any yard sale or junk store and get any record I wanted for well under $1, because in those days the compact disc was taking off and people were losing interest in their old vinyl record albums and 45s, so they were getting rid of them at an alarming rate in order to buy the new CD technology that was becoming big. Well, as the years passed, many people got it in their head that all records are automatically worth a fortune. You know, it don't matter who the artist is or what kind of shape the record's in, it's a record, and they don't make these anymore. These are highly collectible, these are worth a fortune, blah, 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 blah. I've heard it all. Well, in some cases, that may be true, but the majority of the records that you find out there are common, everyday records that are worth minimal amounts of money. I still enjoy going to yard sales and flea markets and such looking for records, and yes, there are still good deals out there, but the good deals are not as common as they were a long time ago. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one is the internet and eBay. Let's say someone finds a stack of records in their grandmother's closet, and they just go look them up on the internet and see where some clown on eBay is asking $50 for a Lawrence Welk album, and they automatically assume theirs is worth that much. Well, there's one thing you need to remember. What somebody asks for a record and what it actually sells for is two different things. You can ask $1 million for a record on eBay. That doesn't mean that anybody's going to buy it. Thus, the record's not worth that. And even if a record does sell for a certain amount on eBay, that's still not concrete. A record can sell for $50 or $75 or $100 this week, but the same record next week may only bring $1. It just all depends on who's looking at the auction and how bad people want it. Another problem that I see are these price guide books. Now let me just say, the only reason these price guide books are in my possession is for the purpose of dating records. I really don't put a whole lot of stock in the prices listed in them. But the mistake most people make is they run out to the bookstore and they buy these price guides after they find that stack of records in grandmother's closet or in their parents' basement or whatever, and they just immediately flip through the pages and go to, oh, here's my Beatles album, it's worth $500 or it's worth $100, and once they see that, you know, they're stuck on that price. Well, the book says it's worth so-and-so. Well, let me just say this. You can't sell your item to the book. The book's not buying it. At best, all the book is a price guide. Your record is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And usually people make the mistake of not reading the preface at the front of the book that gives all kind of information about use of the price guide. And another factor that people fail to pay attention to are the condition of their records. Most serious record collectors only buy records that rate as being in very good plus condition or better. And what I mean by that is the record should be clean, should not be severely scratched, and the jacket should be presentable. And when the record's played, it should play all the way through without any sort of skips or hang-ups or extreme surface noise or crackle or distortion or any other defect. In fact, here's an example of a 45 RPM record that's in presentable shape, nice and clean. No severe scratches or dings or warps. No kind of stickers on the label or writing on the label. And the record plays clean whenever it's placed on the turntable. But unfortunately, all too often, these are the kind of records I see. Copies that are fairly worn, beat up, scratched. This one looks like it's been chewed on by something. And worst case scenario, this record here is rather worn and cracked. That's no good. But all too often, these are the kind of records I see at various places, and they think they're worth a fortune just because they're vinyl. Well, they're not. They're scratched, they're worn out. Most people do not want these. And here's an example of a long playing record that's in decent shape. This record's fairly clean, and it's obvious that whoever owned it took reasonable care of it. It plays through okay with decent fidelity and no problems. And here's the album cover. No, it's not perfect. It has some ring wear and some minor defects, but all in all, this is a good jacket that, you know, I certainly have no problem with adding it to my record collection. Now, here's a couple of LPs that are relatively beat up. I picked these up somewhere just to demonstrate, just to make this video. These didn't even have a cover when I found them. And as a result, they're dirty, they're dinged up, they're scratched, they're pretty much worthless. Although this album, we're only in it for the money by the mothers of invention, would probably be worth a few bucks had someone taken care of it and kept it in the jacket. But they didn't do that, so like I said, it's pretty much worthless. Here's another example, a Richard Harris album that was not taken care of and just left out of the jacket. All scratched up, basically ruined. Another thing that serious collectors look for is whether or not the record is a first pressing or a later pressing. For example, we take the Meet the Beatles album, for example. It was originally issued on Capitol Records on the Capitol Rainbow label. Well, that album stayed in print for 20 or 30 more years and went through many different label variations. But the point I'm trying to make is an original Meet the Beatles album on the Capitol Rainbow label will likely be worth more to a collector than, say, the same album reissued in the early 80s on the purple Capitol label. And like we'll take this Buckingham's album, for example. The original pressing that came out in the late 1960s was issued on this 60s era Columbia 360 Sound label. Later pressings were issued on the standard red Columbia label that just had Columbia along the perimeter of the label. Well, to a collector, they would be more interested in this pressing than a later pressing. Now, if you just want the record just to play and enjoy the music, it really doesn't matter what pressing you have, and I guess I sort of fall into the latter category there. I like to find original copies when I can, but I certainly don't turn my nose up at second or third pressings if I can find them and they're in good shape. Another misconception that people have is, let's say they find a Beatles or an Elvis or a Rolling Stones album, and they automatically think they've struck pay dirt because of the artist. Well, that's likely not the case, actually. There are exceptions to the rule, but the artists I just mentioned were very popular, which means they sold lots and lots of records, which means those records are still common today, which means they're easy enough to find, which means you've likely not struck pay dirt when you find a copy. So no, your Beatles White Album is not likely to bring 3 or 4 figures. It's more likely to bring under $10 or less. in good shape. In fact, some of the records that are worth the most money are the more obscure blues and R&B and rock and roll stuff from the 50s and earlier, provided they're in good shape and provided you find someone who's actually interested. So bringing this video to a close, let me just remind you, don't put too much stock in what you see on eBay. Just because it's on eBay doesn't mean you're going to get that much for it. In fact, I've gotten to the point when somebody tells me that, oh, well, I'm not going to take $1 for that record. A copy like this just sold on eBay for $50. I just tell them, well, you better just put it on eBay and see if you can get $50 for it. Don't put too much faith in these price guide books. Once again, it's a book. You can't sell your item to the book. The prices listed in here is strictly someone's opinion. And the main thing you want to remember is an item is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. In fact, I've been in many record stores, and there's one right here in this town that has a ton of used albums that they've had for years, and right by the record cabinet are 2 or 3 different copies of these gold mine price books, and that's how he bases his prices. Guess what? He doesn't sell that many records. I was talking to the hired help in there one time, and he even said that, you know, we don't sell that many records. Occasionally someone will come in and buy one, but he said pretty much the owner of the establishment, all he's seeing is dollar signs, and he's got it in his head that just because the book says it's worth a certain amount, then that's what he's going to get, or he's not going to sell the record. Well, I've got news for him. He'll probably have the records on the day he dies. Now, if he'd mark them down to say $1 or $2 an album, or a quarter or 50 cents for the 45s, then he would probably sell more records, but he's likely not going to do that. So what do? I just stick with the places around town where I can still get records. Usually for the run-of-the-mill stuff, I only pay maybe $1 or $2 for albums, and a quarter to 50 cents for 45s and 78s. Okay, we're about out of time here, and this video is getting lengthy, but I think you get the idea. Thanks for watching, and more to come later, and happy record collecting.